I've done a $105 million deal with one of the two big hardware stores. I've done a $125 million deal with one of the biggest retail technology companies in the world. I've done a whole smattering of 8-figure deals. And I'll say this as just a caveat to all this.
My name's Chris Bussing. Welcome to my channel. It's committed to helping more people create lives of freedom and impact through success in tech sales and the pursuit of self-development. I've got an amazing guest today, Andy Gotelli, a former teammate and friend from Google Cloud that is still a current friend. Now he's at Databricks. And in this conversation, we're going to learn about what it's like to work at the best cloud computing and data companies in the world like Google Cloud and Databricks, what it takes to close $150 million deals. You got that right, 9-figure deals. And what really matters in life at the end of the day, deals aside. If you guys enjoy this conversation, make sure to give the like button a love tap and share this video with more people who could benefit from the message. Andy, thanks so much for being here, man.
Thanks for having me, Chris. I'm stoked to be back, man.
Dude, this is round 2, and we're doing it right. High production quality.
Yeah, man, this is certainly better than connecting via video chat in my home office while my kids and dogs cry in the background.
We're always upgrading, baby. And let's dig right into the conversation. You mentioned an expression that in an axiom that's really important to you, ab ipso ferro. And correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't that a part of... is it like a family crest or something? Tell us, what does that mean to you? I feel like there's lessons in it.
Yeah, it's my family motto. It's on our, I don't know if the camera will pick this up, but it's on our signet rings. It's on our coat of arms. It means from the same iron in Latin. I think a lot of times people kind of arrive into the world and they don't have a totality of knowledge about how their family got here. Something that's always been really fascinating to me, and it inspired even like the first tattoo I ever got when I had my son, is that we tend to think of miracles as something associated with magic or mysticism, something that, oxygen turning into gold or someone coming back from the dead or something like that. But when you think about the insane probabilities that go into the hundreds of generations of two people randomly meeting one another, pairing off, their genes combining to have two more people that randomly met, their genes combining to create a person who met another person, all the way down to create you and the person that you choose to spend your life with, and then creating your own progeny. That to me is an incredible miracle. For my wife to exist is the outcome of an insanely incredible number of probabilities having to work out the way that they did. On top of that, I think everyone's existence and experience is incredibly different when it comes to family history. My wife has a distinct lack of knowledge around her family history because she was adopted. And so the people that actually gave biological birth to her, she doesn't have a ton of knowledge about them past that generation. She doesn't know who her biological grandparents were or where they came from. There are tools now to help us that we didn't have, 20, 30 years ago, the 23andMe's of the world. But even that, when it can tell you like, okay, 46% of you comes from this region in France, that's not the same as like, here's a human being who lived here. Here's what their life was like. Here's what their experience was like. That is unfortunately mostly a distinctly white phenomenon. Like when African Americans were brought to America, they mostly did it involuntarily in a very particular period of history. And most of them were forced to leave knowledge of family, history, their language, their culture behind them. One of the privileges of being white now is that you do get to maintain knowledge of your family lineage and history, and that is the case with me. Now, when my family arrived here in 1879, they were not considered white. Italians were among the group of European populations that were not considered white at the time. That would change because whiteness is a social construct. It's not a race, but that would change during the middle of the 20th century when the existing white population decided they needed to gather more allies to push back against the civil rights movement. And so as evil as that is, Italians and Irish were for the first time considered kind of normal Americans, especially after about a century of kind of interbreeding with the rest of the native population, with the not really the native population, but what we're calling native at the time, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants of British and Scottish heritage. My grandfather, my great-grandfather came here from Italy, and the reason that ab ipso ferro is on our family crest and our signet rings is that I tend to think back on all the trials and tribulations that the Gotellis that came before me had to go through for me to sit here in this comfy leather seat talking to you about selling enterprise software. I had an ancestor that marched with Gaius Julius Caesar's 6th Legion. I had ancestors that were poor Italian peasant farmers who just scratched out just enough to live from the earth. And then they took everything that they had and got on a boat and crossed the ocean to a strange land they'd never seen before. Travel now is so different. We see video. We can call someone up and talk to someone who lives there. Now it's like, hey, I got a letter that says America's pretty cool. We should go over there. And my great-grandfather arrived here having never seen America, didn't speak the language, and made a living for himself that enabled our family to survive that crossing and flourish in the United States. And so while I am in an extreme position of privilege, I like to think that the hard material that made up such a resilient population of Gotellis before me, I like to remind myself that that's still somewhere inside of me, that I have the capability and the foundation to overcome whatever small adversities I might, by comparison, encounter in my daily life. So especially now that I'm a father, those things matter. Telling my kids where they came from, telling my kids that every day may seem hard. I mean, life is a difficult endeavor in general, but they're made of sterner stuff. They're made of hard material. Hard men sacrifice so that they could live a soft life, and they have the capability to be hard when they need to.
Mm. It's amazing that you have that humility to recognize that, we are very privileged. I'll speak for myself as well, but there are folks who came before you, Gotellis, who came before you that really had some mettle in them, overcame some incredible adversity, and you have that within you. So does your children, and it's really cool that you have that reminder of that. And you've gone through some challenges though in your life, right?
Everyone does, sure. I don't know if it's the same as fighting off the Gauls on the steppes of the French Alps to defend the Roman Empire, but yeah, I've had a journey. I think most people do.
Yeah, and we talked about this last time, but you overcame some challenges with addiction, and I think that it's something that I've dealt with myself. And would you consider that to be one of your biggest triumphs and also on the other side of that, the biggest challenges you've faced? Because I also don't want to assume, have there been other challenges in your life that...
Yeah, I mean, certainly when you're born to an upper middle class white family in America at the end of the 20th century, your perspective on what a challenge or adversity is a little skewed. I'm sure someone born in, Darfur, Sudan would not consider what I have been through challenging or adverse. And they'd probably be correct. But from my own perspective, certainly my battle with addiction was the most formative experience that I've had in my life. It's what forced me to really take kind of an introspective inventory of the things that I loved and hated about myself, enabled me to kind of put myself on the path to where I am now. I'm incredibly grateful that I met my wife after I had that experience, that I had my children after I had that experience. I don't think I would have been ready for any of those things or the daily challenges of a high-stress job if I hadn't been through that experience as of yet. I think it definitely prepares you when you do the really intense introspective work required of entering into recovery. I think it prepares you for what you're going to face later in the world. I mean, I used to joke with people at Google all the time. We'd be in these town hall meetings and someone would be like, they've put the kale chips that I really like on the micro kitchen in the 5th floor, and I work on 7. And so now I have to go down 2 floors to get these chips. And I just don't understand how I can
like
be
those
expected
kale chips.
to work.
They were good.
I'm not saying they're bad, but again, it changes your perspective on, and you're in these kind of like sales rah-rah meetings and they'll be like, we need to climb Everest this quarter, and you're kind of like, all right, man, like, don't get me wrong, you're going to get my best effort. But the idea that, us sitting in this fortress-like skyscraper downtown, all being paid 6 figures, that we have somehow encountered like a dragon that must be slayed in the form of Q4 is a little humorous when you've been to more than a dozen funerals of people your age who didn't make it here. Like, so I don't say that because the people in those rooms that are raising those concerns are wrong. Most likely it means they just like made a lot of way better choices than I did prior in their life. A lot of people that work in our industry are just all-stars. They grew up and never made a mistake. They went to Stanford and never made a mistake. They got a job at Google or Microsoft and never made a mistake. And so like their perspective on like what a bad day is just different than mine. Now I consider that an advantage. I'm sure they would not want to trade. You know what I mean? So to each their own, for sure.
Yeah. I feel like I have an idea of the answer, but what are some of the advantages of really getting some battle scars, really going through adversity and rock bottoms versus someone who's never, dare I say, had the opportunity to go through that level of adversity?
Resiliency is just something that's only gained through experience, in my opinion. I don't think you can be, having never experienced real adversity, I don't think you can prepare yourself for it without going into it. I mean, if you talk to someone who, I'm someone who's fortunate enough to have a lot of professional and personal acquaintances who have served in the armed forces and for various nations. And when you talk to guys like that, like, of course, every military on earth is spending all the money they possibly can to create a training environment that will prepare someone to go to war. But no one does. Like, the first time a live round snaps by your head is a very different thing than any training exercise, no matter how intense it is. The first time you lose a friend is very different than when your friend has to lay down and play dead during a training exercise. And I think it's the same thing in life, when you are told by a prospect to, go pound sand and never call them again, that might be the meanest thing someone's ever said to you if you've lived a certain quality of life. It's not the meanest thing that's ever been said to me. And, even in my personal life, in the last year, my son was diagnosed with autism, and that is an incredibly difficult moment for a parent. And I don't know if I would have been able to just kind of keep pushing forward and be prepared for it if I hadn't been through some really tough stuff prior to that could have really broken me for a longer period of time. So it's not that people that have lived, lives on the straight and narrow are not capable of having resilience and pushing through adversity. It's just that they might not know how they'll react until that moment comes, whereas I know how I'll react.
Going through adversity prepared you for the challenges that you faced, raising a family. You mentioned your kid being diagnosed with autism. It's prepared you. And it's prepared you for the path you're on and the big success that you've had at companies like Google and now Databricks as well.
Yeah.
And so thank you for your vulnerability. I feel like that topic is just very poignant because in my own life, I have seen that I've lived a roller coaster ride of real lows and glorious highs. And I will say, I think the lows have given me a joy and appreciation for the good times, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, there's an age-old story about, there's a basement in the Pentagon where they put up big monitors on the wall that imitated windows so that the people that worked in these offices could have some degree of like feeling like they had an outside. Because a lot of times these guys have to work in highly secure, there can't be windows at the Pentagon, right? And at first, it was always sunny through the windows. and that they were displaying on these screens. But eventually they realized that without displaying rainy days, the sun just kind of drifted into the background and there was no joy to be brought from these window pane screens anymore. Now, I'm sure they'd rather have a real window, but at the same time, I think there is a lesson there that like life is all about comparison, whether we want it to be or not. And so if I think it's the same thing as like when you hear stories about when people win the lottery, like their perspective just shifts. If you suddenly have $25 million and you live every single day like it's a party, the party becomes less fun because it no longer really, it's nothing special. It doesn't mean anything. You know, you see a lot of kids who grow up in affluence deal with the same issues. It's very hard for them to like get the same joy. Like if you or I go get a Ferrari today, it'll be pretty awesome. It'll be an incredible experience. If your first car was an Aston Martin and you've been through 7 of them, Ferrari is probably just like another thing on the checklist and probably brings like very momentary joy. So, yeah.
I was watching a podcast last night randomly of Tucker Carlson interviewing Tony Robbins.
What a duo.
What a duo. I mean, Tony Robbins is unreal. And he Tony spoke about the seasons in life and in this world. So seasons of the economy going up and down, and in our personal lives, seasons of difficulty, getting laid off, going through a challenge with our family, a health issue, and then springs and so it's like, I think just understanding that our lives and the broader tapestry of the world has a seasonality to it gives us some perspective. I'd love for you to...
Something my mother told me that has always stuck with me is when I was going through one of the worst periods of my life, she told me, remember that this too shall pass. And that is a reassuring comment to you when you're going through something terrible. But fewer people think about it when you're going through a really great period of time.
Oh.
And it's tough to face that because everyone wants to believe that good times last forever. When we were shopping for a house, and I remember going to my realtor and saying, "Hey man, like housing prices have now surpassed where they were in 2008, which we all kind of universally objectively realized was a crazy bubble that popped, destroyed the world economy. Housing prices were out of control. And now we've surpassed that. Are we in another bubble?" And I remember him being like, "No, absolutely not. We're going to grow at 15% a year for 10 years here in Austin." And of course, now we've seen that the market has like done what it's done. And I think no one wants to be the negative Nancy in the room. And I'm not saying go out and be a pessimist, but develop an attitude of buoyancy where you don't get too high or too low, because good times nor bad times last forever. And you need to be able to get through the bad times and learn the lessons, but you also need to be able to like be present in good moments without behaving as if they're always going to be here. So how many sales guys have you known that have a huge year and they're like, "Yeah, I'm going to make $1 million every year now." And it's like, no, you're not, dude. Like, you better stash some of that away because winter is coming, said the Starks, you know?
So let's talk about a season in your life where I imagine you were quite excited and energized. You first get into Google Cloud.
Yeah.
You know, walk us through what drew you to the Googs.
Yeah, I mean, Google has, I think, gone through, like any company, eras of its reputation. But I was born in '89. For me, Google was like the Apple of my generation. But for my dad, like Apple was that company. Like when he graduated from college, the coolest stuff was being done at Apple in the Valley. And I was raised on those legends, right? Like be a pirate. You don't want to work at IBM and work for the man. You want to be a pirate. You want to work in the Valley. You want to work at Apple. You want to work for Jobs. And at the end of my time at Oracle was right when Walter Isaacson's Steve Jobs biography dropped. And it was the most energized I'd ever been about technology as a concept. I was really in kind of a technophile phase where I truly believed that like technology held the answers for all of humanity's problems and we could lift people out of poverty with the right application of technology. A little bit of it was definitely like youthful naivete about like, I think people tend to view technology as a neutral thing, as if it's like its own entity and like, oh, it's not good or bad. It's just a tool. It's how we use it. Which is true, except that like some of the best minds in our society are all being paid a ton of money to like bend technology in a certain direction. Like Facebook is not an animal that gets to grow by itself. It's being like very much pointed at certain targets and like built, continuously developed by some brilliant humans to do a certain thing. So in that time period, I was incredibly excited just about the technology space. I felt so hopeful about the democratizing force of cloud technology in general. I thought that was such a cool concept that, you know, previous to that, if you wanted to start a company, even if you had the best idea in the world, it required so much capital. You needed to go buy all these servers and find a place to put them and the power and the cooling and someone to sit in this data center all day and upgrade it. And oh my gosh, a new security patch is needed and you need all this stuff. Millions of dollars. Suddenly with cloud computing, it's back to the 80s again. Like you and me have a great idea. We're in our garage. We can go on Amazon Web Services. We can go on Azure. We can go on GCP. We can spin up the same resources that the biggest companies in the world, the DoD, like the greatest institutions on the planet Earth are currently using and harness that horsepower for our idea. And we saw some companies at the time that were just like able to just blow up doing that. I mean, the infrastructure required to run Snapchat would have taken billions of dollars and 2 decades to build out if they had been around in 1995. But they were able to scale that way overnight because they were a cloud customer. Another success story I remember at the time was, I don't know if you remember the summer that like Pokemon Go dropped and we suddenly all were outside again. And that's an app that went from like 5 users to like hundreds of millions in the space of weeks. And to scale that way would have been absolutely impossible. Like even with unlimited funding, the idea of just like the physical task of like plugging in and integrating new boxes to that environment at a rate that they were building a user base would have been insane. Instead, the cloud allows you to just like scale into oblivion based on these giant data centers that all the cloud providers have built out. So that democratizing force really drew me to the concept of cloud. And I was really fortunate to be on Oracle's cloud team. Even if Oracle wasn't doing that great in the cloud space at the time, being able to learn the terms and the technology and the space was really important. And then I just got, I was lucky that there just wasn't that many cloud specialists out there yet. Like now everyone is. But at the time, there were probably only like 5 or 6 companies with a cloud infrastructure team. It was like Oracle, HP, IBM, AWS, Microsoft, and Google maybe. Those were the big ones for sure. And maybe you could include, like if you want to get technical, like Rackspace and like some of the larger co-hosting spots could be considered in the same basic area, but the pool of candidates was just much smaller. And so I got a call from a former colleague at Oracle who is now on the recruiting team at Google, and he asked me to interview. And I don't know if Google has the same luster. My perspective is warped by having worked there. But to me at the time, Google was like this magical company. Like they were truly the new Silicon Valley. They have a ball pit, just all that stuff, right? They have everyone bikes all over this campus, and they have a ball pit and a slide, and there's a massage parlor at work, and all the crazy stuff. And I went through the interview process. I was incredibly nervous because I really put I already felt the pull of my ego around working at Google. Like when I told people I was interviewing at Google, they were impressed, even just to interview there. I remember people being like, "You must be a genius." That's how Google was viewed.
By the way, I relate to so much of this whole story because I was at Oracle in the cloud space, and even that feeling, Google ego.
And Google didn't hire salespeople yet. So like everyone that you knew of that worked at Google was like a genius engineer. And so like that was the reputation of the company at large. They didn't hire like a whole bunch of dumb jock sales guys yet to like fully dilute that reputation into garbage. But I was in the airport, the Austin airport. I was flying up to see my then girlfriend, now wife, for Valentine's Day, and I was in the security line, and I got the call that I'd gotten the job. And I cheered, and I got pulled out of the line for an extra security check for making such a scene, and I didn't care at all.
Dude.
And I had this big plan. I was gonna like take a couple weeks and like ramp down at Oracle, and then go right into the job at Google, and like blah blah blah. And by the time I got back to Austin at the end of that weekend, I was like, "Nah, man, I'm walking out. I'm going to tell Oracle today I'm putting my 2 weeks and leave. And they walked me immediately. I did get to give some handwritten thank you notes to some people that really mattered to me at Oracle. And then I had about 3 weeks off between the 2 gigs. And I just
that's awesome.
It was great. I was living at an apartment out in the hills above 360 at the time, one of those.
Yeah.
Which
in the Austin area.
Yeah.
Right?
I think Grant Cardone owns the apartment complex now, which is really sad. But at the time it was cool. And then I went out for 3 straight weeks in Palo Alto for training. And as someone that kind of grew up worshiping the concept of Silicon Valley, that was one of the coolest times of my life. I had this rental car, and I went to I literally drove to like the house where Jobs and Woz built the first Apple II in the garage. And I just like got out of the car and looked at this house, which I'm sure some millionaire was like, what is this guy doing in front of my house? I went to Xerox PARC, where the first graphic user interface was built, the mouse was invented. Like, to me, this was just like driving through the history of Silicon Valley. And I came back and I started the gig at Google, and the kind of people I was meeting was just mind-blowing to me. Like, I sat down my first day at training, and the guy next to me was like, oh, where'd you come from? And I was like, oh, I was at Oracle. And he was like, cool, man. I was like, where are you from? I was like, oh, I was on Johnny Ive's team. I helped design the iPad at Apple. And I was like, oh my God, everyone here is a genius. So that was the beginning of imposter syndrome for sure. But the next 6 and change years, almost 7 years, were an awesome ride, man. It was an awesome ride.
Being there for 6 to 7 years, what aspects of the culture did you enjoy the most as you were actually like working and doing the job and getting seasoned in the role?
Yeah. Especially at the beginning, and companies just change over time. At the beginning, Google was a truly special customer-focused place. I felt completely empowered to do whatever was necessary to make it right with a customer. Our customers were there were a lot fewer of them. There was a lot less revenue, and the customers individually were a lot more important. And so if I needed to get on a plane 2 hours from now and go to Atlanta and to fix something, that was cool. Like, there were no budgetary limits. There were no anything. It was just like, do the job the way it should be done. There was a real, I felt at the time, a real culture of be incredibly ruthlessly honest about what is occurring and what is not occurring. They were not overly slavish to KPIs and OKRs to tell the story. They wanted, tell me the narrative. Like, what is the story of this customer? What are we actually doing there? What is happening on the ground? It was a very special time, man. From like until about 2019, 2020, it was like one of the coolest places to work, I think, in the world.
Yeah, and I joined Google Cloud at December 2018, which was around 2019, and had a great year, man. And moved up to field sales from the inside sales team and went to LA, and the pandemic happened, and that was just a crazy time, regardless of where you're at. But
yeah, I had such a bizarre, because they liquidated inside sales, so that was done.
Yeah,
and so it was either move up or move out. It was like find a new gig or you're gone. I was fortunate enough to get an FSR role, a field sales role, but my boss was like, you have to move to Dallas. And Cassie had just moved to Austin like 6 months earlier.
So your wife.
Yeah. So we were finally in the same place after being long distance for 3 years. And I was like, now I'm going to move to Dallas, because she couldn't move. She had gotten a job here and everything. And so the decision we came to was that I was going to commute on Monday morning to Dallas and stayed in Dallas Monday through Friday and come back on weekends for as long as it took. It sucked. Luckily, I only had to do it for 2 weeks, and the pandemic hit, and I got to work from home, so it worked out. But it was wild.
Damn. I mean, the pandemic's rough for a lot of people, but what a blessing in your case.
Dude, it turned out to be, I had my best years. Like, I say that. I'm currently having my best year ever, but those were my best years at Google, for sure.
Yeah. So let's talk about what it's like to sell cloud computing. I remember reading an internal document at Google. Don't worry, I'm not going to say exactly what it was. As I say that, I'm like, oh, careful what I say.
They're dispatching the special ops team.
They listening
right
to this.
now.
It's going to be on YouTube. But at a high level, it was written by the solution architects who are smart technical resources, and they just had a funny line when they were describing cloud for the sales team is like, this is the hardest thing that's ever been sold in the history of mankind. I just remember that. And selling Google Cloud at third in the market is it's incredible technology, and there's areas where GCP is differentiated, but also Amazon invented the market, Microsoft's number 2. So the point is, like, what was the reality of selling cloud computing at Google, the pros and some of the cons and challenges?
Yeah, I think, a VP at Oracle, when I was right at the end of my time there, said something really interesting to me. He said, this used to be a wonderful industry until Amazon ruined it. And I think that was very telling about how Oracle viewed their relationships with their customers, their relationship with their market, the sales motion. Cloud made it a requirement that you had to continuously provide a really great customer experience and that you had to deliver on your promises. So many Oracle customers got the full court press. It seemed like it was going to be great. And then as soon as their pen lifted off the page from signing the contract, it just turned into nightmare fuel. Like, because you couldn't get out of it, right?
And it was upfront, large.
All these deals back in the day they're on-prem, right? So it's like, what are you going to do? Like, you're going to decide after they've moved 5,000 metal boxes into your building and plugged them all in that it doesn't work that well? Like, well, cool. Like, you're stuck for a year and you've paid up front. So cloud, they can spin up, they can spin down, they could move in a week if they needed to. It suddenly changed the requirements of what we did for a living. You needed to be very technically competent in order to do the job. The people we were selling to changed very rapidly. The example I always use is Microsoft in their Steve Ballmer era. It's like the best sales guy got to be the president of most of these companies. So a lot of sales guys in late 90s Oracle they're a good sales guy. They're going into these companies, playing golf and eating steaks with their best sales guy, who's now the CEO, and they're hitting a deal together once a year. That's great, right? Every January or December, we go in, move a few decimal points around, sign a new deal, everyone gets paid, move along. Satya Nadella takes over Microsoft. And suddenly we see that everywhere, that like the CEOs of these companies, the founders of these companies are no longer primarily businessmen. I mean, they are. It's not that Satya's not a brilliant business guy, but he's primarily a technologist, a brilliant technical mind. So if you whip up in a 3-piece suit with your hair slicked back and your Ferrari and walk into these offices full of like dudes playing Dungeons and Dragons in dirty t-shirts and try to slick talk them, and they're like, hey bro, write one line of code for me, and you fail, it's over. So the requirements of the job changed very rapidly. It became a much longer sales cycle, I think, than most old school salespeople were familiar with. And you and I talked about this on the way here, but a lot of like sales influencers that I see, I hate that term, but like that's the best way to describe it. I'll say his name. I see Andy Elliott a lot around. And these are guys that teach a very specific type of sales that is kind of about winning in the room and then escaping. Like, whether the product works or they like it, not your concern. Your job is to like close them and then run away into the night. That can't work above a certain dollar mark, in my opinion. Like, sure, you can sell a used car that way. You can trick someone into buying a used car.
A timeshare.
A timeshare, insurance, cable television, things like that, where it's a one-time point of sale. You buy it right here, and then it's over. For someone buying $125 million of cloud computing assets over the next 5 years, there is no way that happens in the space of one meeting. It's going to require dozens of interactions across dozens of personalities, and you are going to have to be able to migrate from a space of selling to a space of education and fielding kind of all the requirements of a bunch of different stakeholders. And you become a lot more obsessed with internal process, hierarchy, power dynamics within the organizations you're selling to, and emotional intelligence around navigating what does this person need, what do they want, what do they not know they need and want, how can I facilitate crafting a message around my product that answers those needs and wants. And then you have to do that hundreds of times to close a single deal. It's very different than if I just get this guy scared enough about dying on the way home, he'll buy insurance from me. And so, yeah, it's a very different motion. It requires a lot more in the way of reputation and personal rapport building and crafting a relationship with a person that makes them want to act on your behalf. The creation of customer champions is so crucial to what we do. And if you kind of skis ball somebody from the jump, you may have shot yourself in the foot before you even get off the starting line.
And you could sell a deal and not provide good ongoing support. Or at least you could sell someone starting to spin up more and consume more on Google Cloud, for example. You don't provide support, and then they start to spin it down.
Yeah,
and I mean, yeah, maybe you get them into a multi-year contract, and
it's the biggest gap I see people fall into when they move from like the SMB space up to where we are in like corporate or enterprise or whatever anyone calls them, mid-market, enterprise, select. People that are down in the kind of SMB startup space, they get really used to a very high operational tempo of like closing the first $500 of spend, getting someone to put something into the cloud, and that's the win. And then they move on to the next one. They don't always develop the after sales care skill set required to tackle a much more complex sales cycle that involves multiple divisions, multiple user groups, multiple teams within the same organization. And that's going to be a baseline table stakes requirement for the more large, complex deals you're going to do in the upper echelons of these organizations. And a lot of times, there are all-star salespeople from SMB startup ranks who take that step up, and they're really great at kind of the break-in first workload part of the motion. But then when it comes to, okay, how do you ensure that that's successful? How do you translate that into the next workload? How do you bring more on? How do you leverage the success of that one workload to make that person inside of that organization look like a star so they move up to the next rank within that company? And then you've got your man on the inside at the director level. Okay, what can we do from there? Like, those are all way more long-term thinking type exercises. And it's not, I mean, I compare basically, I think everyone does this, but like I graft a lot of what we do to the hobbies that I partake in. And for me, like I have for a long time played chess, and high-level chess players are way more 5-move thinking guys and gals than they are what's the next move. So pretty good chess players are thinking about what move are you going to do. Great chess players are thinking, what move are they going to do? What move am I going to do? And then what will they do in response to that? And then the greatest chess players are the ones who have memorized hundreds of permutations and combinations around when this knight is sitting on this square, how many different combinations of moves can the two of us do in the next 3 to 5 moves? And how can I, after that 5-move set, put myself in a position to win? That's the same kind of thinking you have to apply to this. Because you can sit there and say like, oh, there's a deal here, I can close this deal. It takes a lot of discipline and experience to say, if I close this deal, will there be a downside? Just like we were talking about, no one ever thinks about this too shall pass when they're having a good time. When there's a deal on the table and you can get paid and the money's real, suddenly it's not like theoretical dollars. It's like, oh, if I close this, I'm going to make 10 grand right now in my pocket. It's hard to say, but I'll never get another dollar out of them again if we do this. And if I want $100,000 out of them, I have to tell them not to do this. And that takes tremendous discipline.
Mm. So 5-step thinking is critical in enterprise sales.
Yeah, for sure.
So you're thinking about how does this move today impact the move on the customer's end that impacts my move and their move? Am I on the right path? Basically, we're talking conceptually.
Think about like how we've taught large language models and AIs to play chess or Go or any of these more complex strategic games. The computer is not thinking about what it's going to do next. It's thinking like 6, 7, 8 move combinations down the line, millions of them, so that it can plan for that. And it is a superior player. Like when a chess computer, the best chess computers we have now are allowed to be turned all the way up, no human can beat them. We've already surpassed all human capability when it comes to a chess computer. It took a while for Go because it's a little more complex and a little more abstract, but we got there too. AlphaGo was in China, they consider that like their Sputnik moment, is like when the greatest Go champion lost to AlphaGo. So if you model your strategy on the best players in the world at anything, in sales, you should model yourself off that kind of strategic thinking. Not what will happen next, but what will happen next if I do this next.
So you've closed $150 million deals.
More than one.
More than one,
Yeah.
right? Walk us through, like, first off, because I'm nerding out. I just think it's cool. I'm kind of fanboying here, but because I haven't closed a $150 million deal. That's amazing. So how many, like, walk us through some of your biggest deals. We don't have to go in the weeds, but like how many 100 million deals? How many, like, I think it's 9 figures, how many 8? And then I wanted to hit on the concept of actually saying no to a deal today for a bigger deal tomorrow. So first, like, walk us through just high level some of your notches in your belt with your big deals.
Yeah, sure. I mean, since I don't work there anymore, I don't necessarily want to give the names of specific customers.
Yes, let's not do that. But just high level,
yes.
even at like a use case or
I've done a $105 million deal with one of the 2 big hardware stores. I've done a $125 million deal with one of the biggest retail technology companies in the world. I've done a whole smattering of 8-figure deals. And I'll say this as just a caveat to all this. Everyone loves this. Everyone loves the idea of closing the bajillion-dollar deal. But I always tell people that, like, the sweet spot in sales may not be up in the clouds trying to close the billion-dollar transaction, because there's one of those every 5 years. If you move down to like the 8-figure rank, there's dozens of those done every year at every company, and they pay just as well. I mean, maybe not exactly as well, but if you do 2 of them, you'll make a ton more money than I made on the one giant 9-figure deal. You know what I mean? Like, so I always tell people, like, the ego in us wants to be enterprise select. I cover company you've heard of, not company you've never heard of. Like, it's always more fun to tell a story about closing a vast, giant deal with Chipotle than it is to cover, I closed this $17 million deal with ActiveTrack. People are like, what's that? But I don't care. Like, and you shouldn't either. You know what I mean? Like, teach yourself not to care that much about those things. Because, again, like, from the game perspective of, like, the politics of a company, logos matter for sure. And there is definite value in those things. But if you're talking about, like, how do I make the most money, it's in mid-market companies that have the resources to spend $10 million, but there's 1,000 of those every year, rather than chasing the white whale billion-dollar deal that you're going to get once in your career, for sure. But yeah, so that was the caveat. I've done probably a dozen deals north of 10 million, and then probably 20 7-figure deals. And then, man, once you get into like 6 figures, that's like especially, and again, that sounds so crazy. It all depends on where you work, because like now, like at Databricks, a $1 million deal is a very different thing than it was at Google. At Google, you're talking about their entire IT infrastructures on Google. Like, you could easily hit $1 million and they don't even satisfy your number for the year. Whereas at Databricks, $1 million customer is a huge, huge deal. So, yeah.
So you've had times with customers where you said, we shouldn't do this deal. Shouldn't do this deal. And that actually led to your biggest deal. So walk us through, maybe some of those scenarios and the thinking behind it and kind of the impact.
Yeah. Again, I always think it's smart to take advantage of what people are used to, accustomed to. And if you can subvert their expectations around your own behavior as a salesperson, that's to your advantage. So when you walk in, you are not just Chris or Andy. You are the latest in a long line of every salesperson they've ever dealt with. And so they expect you to follow like a very regimented path towards getting them to buy something. And if you step outside of those bounds in a good way, it can be really, really powerful as far as building trust and rapport. Some of the biggest deals I ever did in my time, both at Google and at other places, began with telling a customer, we were talking about maybe a particular commit of a certain size, and then telling them, actually, and I would say to them, and you want to butter this up a little bit, right? You want to be like, they're going to kill me for telling you this. And that's not untrue, but no one's going to kill you, especially if you can get the bigger deal later. But making them hyper aware of the fact that like you are acting against your own self-interest in favor of theirs is very powerful from a trust perspective, because the goal, and everyone pays lip service to it, of this, like, we want to be trusted advisors. We want to have first swing at every technology project inside of an organization. Well, the way you get there is by having the opportunity to close a deal and saying, actually, either this deal, the mechanics of it, you're better off leaving that alone, or, hey, actually, in this one particular case, you might want to look at other solution. That's incredibly powerful, because if you actually sell something for the competition, you're effectively telling this customer, like, hey, even when I am fully acting against my own self-interest, I'm going to tell you the truth. And then from there on out, they're always going to, like, in the back of their mind, they're going to say, hey, I can put this project in front of Andy and he'll shoot me straight. He's not just going to tell me, Databricks can do it the best, or whoever he works for at the time can do it the best. He will tell me the actual truth. That can be the moment where, from then on out, you get first swipe at everything. And once you have first swipe at everything, then you can really build the real match. Because those big deals are very rarely one-shot jobs. It's very unlikely that someone's going to come to you and say, hey, we just want to move everything. Very few people undertake that. The change management's a nightmare. It's very expensive. It's a ton of work. It is basically what they're going to do for the rest of the year when they take it on. So very few people sign up for that voluntarily. Where it starts is you find the one workload where you really work well. You build on top of that. And then they look up one day and they're like, actually, well, okay, you guys aren't the best at this one part. You're the second best, but we're already doing 27 things on you guys. What does it look like to just do it all together? And you're like, oh, that's an interesting proposition. Like, let's take a look at that. And then the full migration can be on the table.
And you've built the trust in the past where you said, hey, I don't think this is the best fit. You put their interest above your own. And it's funny you mentioned that, because I do have a nice deal in front of me, $30 million over 5.
Very nice.
I'm at a multi-cloud company, so that's actually one of 3 clouds. So the other clouds are 30 million over 5, but they're already on contracts for now. But you can see the potential of this account, like 3 different clouds at 30 million over 5, and they're only going to grow.
Yeah.
And I actually think we're not the best fit for this deal. But I'm also focused on offering them some insight on how to get the best deal. And I see something in what you just shared in terms of an opportunity for myself to put their interests before my own and playing the long game. So what a great lesson, man, especially for the audience out there. Some of the folks are early in their career. Now they're in an SDR role, which requires you need to get short-term results, and you have pressure. But
you and I talked about this the other day privately, that like that's such a tough gig right now. I really do feel some empathy for the SDRs
let's talk
of the world
about that. Now. How do you take on a long-term perspective when you haven't got to the level of freedom and flexibility of being an enterprise seller like yourself or myself, right? Like, let's talk about the SDR role, and then I just as a roadmap for other things I want to hit on, because I know I'm looking at the time. Okay, we got time. We're good. I also want to hit on a couple other thoughts on what it takes to close enterprise deals, like being truly human and Databricks.
Yeah.
So we'll get there. Put a pin in it. Talk about your thoughts on the latest state of the SDR role.
Dude, it's so tough, man. I think companies have really drank their own Kool-Aid and lied to themselves about what an SDR does and what an SDR should be doing and what we should be getting out of an SDR. And it makes me really sad for them. I have a ton of empathy because I've done that job, and I know you have too, and everyone who starts in our industry does this job. And look, I'm sure there are SDRs out there from back in 2010, 11 era like I was. I'm sure every dial you made was real. I'm sure every minute of talk time you got was legit. I'm sure you exist. But I never met you, okay? Every SDR I knew, it's Friday and you need 10 extra calls. There's a list, there's a spreadsheet going around of like fax machines at the government you could call to get like this many dials and this much. Like the role was way less about we expect to get this much business out of our SDR org and way more about, look, hiring a rep from Microsoft to come work at Google is expensive. They're being paid very well at Microsoft. They're established there. We're asking them to come to a new place. We're going to have to pay them better than they're getting paid at Microsoft. We're going to have to give them a huge stock package. We're going to have to poach them effectively. Or you can go down to the SDR org and be like, hey, how about a 6% pay bump and a title? And they're like, absolutely. I'll kill myself for that. So it's way cheaper to have a farm system. And the point of the role is to get your feet wet, learn the ropes, be around people that are doing the job really well. And hey, maybe you do source some deals, right? But now, because of all the post-COVID, in the post-COVID world, like everything's monitored. They've developed all this technology to monitor what is being done on a machine and a phone and everything, even if you're working from home. And that, we needed that at the time because people were just kind of out in the wilderness doing whatever. But that's been translated to this SDR role where like, okay, you piped an op, show us the paper trail. Like, where are the emails that you sent that led to this opportunity? And I'm not saying I'm against that as a concept, but what it does is it removes so much of the capability of the SDR to learn from the AE. Like, I, so many times in my career as an SDR, had times where like, hey, maybe I was going to come up short on the number of opportunities I was supposed to have in a given time period. But I had a great relationship with the rep that I covered. And so they'd throw me one.
Dude, the same thing. I was going to say that, and you took the words out of my mouth. You bring value to them. Maybe you set meetings and shit accounts, but they like wanted your help. And when it comes time to get over the edge to hit your number, there's no shame in leveraging that relationship, and they want to help you win. I actually think that's a skill.
Oh, of course it is.
So, but some might say, oh, like.
I just think that comes from a place of being dishonest with ourselves about what these SDRs ever were. Like the idea that like in 1995, all SDRs were these hyper valuable engines of new business is just a lie. That's just a lie. Like this has always been how it's been done. And I'm not saying that's a defense for things because you can go to a lot of bad places saying we've always done it this way. But SDRs are inherently less experienced, less skilled. And especially the ones coming up now, they've never been on the phone before to order a pizza, much less to try to break into an IT organization and sell them cloud computing. That's a complicated thing. I've talked to a bunch of SDRs that work at Databricks, and these are college grads. These are like 22, 23-year-olds. This is their first job. They want to do well. They have never talked to someone in their life on the phone who's mad at them before until they got this job. You know what I'm saying? Like,
and the younger generations, I sound like an old man, and I don't even know if this is true, but they're not talking on the phone as much. It's more texting anyways. So let alone someone who's pissed at you.
And again, and no strangers. Like the idea of calling a stranger on the phone and bothering them and being told to like go fuck yourself is very foreign to anyone under the age of 25 now, because they just don't have to do any of that. There is no, again, like I always joke about it, but like you don't even order pizza on the phone anymore. There is no call Pizza Hut and get it delivered. Like that doesn't exist. So the concept of like, hey, this person who's never even like operated the machine involved in this process is going to like suddenly be able to break in, and the thinking is super short term. All the OKRs and KPIs associated are like monthly numbers, like, and that also kind of, it's a refusal to acknowledge that so much of our job does come down to timing and luck. Like they want to believe that they can just like train a person to be a really great salesperson. And if you just grind hard enough and follow these steps, you'll become a great salesperson. And that's just not true. Like experience matters, luck matters, time matters, your maturity as a human being matters. Like you're 22 years old calling a 65-year-old CTO, you're going to have less to talk to him about than I do. Like at least in like a bind where I'm trying to form rapport, I can talk about my kids, I can talk about whatever with this guy, and he can like find common ground with me. If you just got done making a really bomb TikTok about how like the margarita you had last night was bussing on God no cap, the CTO at this company is going to have no clue what you just said, dude. You know what I mean? So like
Bet.
the idea of like forcing these kids into this situation where, hey, you got a month to perform and you're on a PIP. I just feel bad for them. I feel bad for them. There was a lot more leash given to people because they just didn't have the metrics to justify like running through candidates that quickly when we were doing the job.
Dude, timing is everything.
Yeah, man.
It's like what are the chances you're going to call an executive and the company is going to have a specific initiative for what you're doing? They have budget set aside. You know,
dude,
they have
like,
compelling event. It's like
I had one of the biggest deals I'm working on right now. I talked to this dude and he's like, he's my champion in this account. We're going to do this incredible deal together this year. And the first conversation we had, he was like, you know, there's a guy that works at Databricks and he told me his name, but I don't know who he is. And he's like, I talked to him 2 years ago and it just wasn't the right time. So, I mean,
So, and that's the encouraging thing is if you're pleasantly persistent and you keep being the squeaky wheel, like, hey, I'm Chris at Databricks and I can help you with this. We helped a similar customer.
That's if you have a long enough.
Yeah, good
you
point.
Need the runway. Like
in most companies, you're going to be changing new territories.
Well, beyond changing territory, like these SDRs, they have, if they don't produce in like a quarter or two, they get put on a PIP. You know what I mean?
Dude,
so
and like, imagine like, you know, you're so right. Like at Oracle, I always talk about one of my famous deals to me, right? It was a 6-figure deal, database deal that closed in Q4 that I hung my hat on to get promoted to a good patch as an inside seller in national tech.
OD, baby.
Yeah, you might remember national tech. 6 months of no response at all, radio silence. Now it all added up and it was all because it wasn't the right timing, but the right timing came in Q4. Imagine if I got given the can. If I got canned before then, things would have been different. But it's just, it takes time.
And then the next guy would have come in, sat down, closed that deal, and they would have been like, see how much better this guy was than Chris? Even though that's not how it works. You know what I mean? It's not a matter of like, we're all playing a game of addition. It's all the efforts of everyone combined. It's not you personally being so good that like this closes or this doesn't. And I think the SDR motion is just something people have never figured out. I remember at Oracle, we would kind of laugh because it would go in these cycles where someone would come, they'd become like director or VP of SDRs, and they'd be like, I have a brilliant game-changing plan. We'll outsource this to India. It'll be so much cheaper. They'll, you know, the op tempo will go up, blah, blah, blah. They'd do that. That guy would get promoted for saving the company so much money. New girl comes in, she's the VP of SDRs now. She's like, the customer experience of outsourced SDRs is bad. So what we'll do is we'll start a class of program, recent college grads, blah, 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 brings them back onshore. She gets promoted for the uptick in customer experience. New guy comes in to be VP. He's like, this is way too expensive. What we need to do is offshore this to India. And it would just back and forth, just a vehicle for continuous promotion of mediocre middle managers. And that sucks for everyone involved. Like it doesn't give you the stability or the runway you need to really develop into a good salesperson. These are complex deals featuring complex products, complex personalities, and a lot of it's luck and timing. And if you don't account for that, I think you're doing yourself as a company and the people that you hire a disservice.
Now, if you grind and you put in the work and you deal with the BS of the SDR role, you can experience increasing levels of freedom impact.
For sure.
Like Andy Gotelli right here, closing monster deals. And so that's a beautiful thing. And so don't you think that, I mean, I'm kind of projecting onto you, it's still worth it. Like this is a meaningful path, isn't it? What is it? What has tech sales opened up for you in terms of opportunities in your life?
In my opinion, it's sales in general, and I think tech sales is special because you are so highly paid for what you do. And it's one of the last true meritocracies left in the world. There are, you know, when I was at Google and even when I'm here at Databricks, I'm surrounded by folks that went to Harvard and Yale and Stanford and every great university under the sun, and they have all the stuff in the universe on their resume. And I went to Texas Tech, graduated in 5 years, recovered heroin addict, and that doesn't matter. Whoever puts up the numbers is number one. So that's rare.
It levels the playing field, man.
It doesn't exist everywhere.
Some Gotelli metal right there.
I would like to think so. In addition, like, there are very few jobs where you can make more than your boss. Most places, you make this much, they make a little more, and you work your way up this ladder. This is one of the only jobs where, like, I could do this job I have right now forever, and I could make more money than my boss every year. I have made more money than my boss every year for close to a decade.
Let's go. So, hey, what the audience might not know is this is a Saturday, and we're going to go a little over. And this is exactly how I wanted to spend my Saturday, in service of the audience.
I'm having a fun time,
extracting your insight. So we're going to go a little over, if that's cool.
Totally cool.
Okay, awesome. Let's finish up on, what it takes to really close these monster deals, 100 million plus deals. There's one specific thing that you mentioned in our conversations leading up to this, and it's just being a human being, like showing your human side. Really, I'd love for you to run with this topic and show us like what that means and what that looks like.
Yeah, I think a lot of times when we're doing our job, we fall into the trap of only viewing the universe from our own perspective. And so we're like, I'm calling this guy, he needs to listen to me. But in reality, everyone that you're calling is being called by 40 other of you, at least. I mean, at Oracle alone, there's like 10 or 12 product lines, and each of them have their own specialty teams.
And you're like competing with them. I was on cloud, they're on premise.
Exactly.
It's hilarious.
And then
SaaS versus infrastructure.
Times that by Microsoft, by Amazon, by HP, by Dell, by all the system integrators that are calling them, the SADAs, the Bespins of the world.
Yeah.
A given CTO of a company whose data is out there could be getting a call by 100 reps on a single day, every day, all the time. So what does that mean for us? It means that default position for most of these guys is to ignore us. We have become, it's like living by the airport. Like, you stop hearing the planes at a certain point. Unless they really are kind of on the hunt for something, they're probably going to try to ignore you to the best of their ability. Your first email is unlikely to get responded to. Now, what I have found is that complex deals, like we said, they're about building. You establish a beachhead, then you expand workload by workload, department by department, organization by organization, until you have the big deal built. You're unlikely to like shoot one shot and kill a blue whale. That isn't how this sport works.
Quick pause. Like, I want to double click on the beachhead. What does that actually look like in the context of cloud computing? Is it like piloting a specific use case and workload, solving a specific business problem?
Yeah,
just for the audience.
Sure. So like, for instance, you will, within a broader organization, like you have all their major motions within their company. They have marketing, they have sales, they have IT. Drill down into IT, they have data science and data engineering and machine learning research and machine learning ops. And then you drill down into machine learning ops, and they have the guys that are doing model training, model serving. And you get in touch with one engineer who's doing model training. And you're like, okay, man, what makes your world turn? What's happening here? And he finally, after some conversations with you, he expresses that his particular little piece of this data pipeline is incredibly manual. It requires a ton of hands-on keyboard work just to keep it working. They're incredibly slow. It's complex. It's expensive. You convince that person to take a shot on comparing his current existence to your version of his existence. Then you say, well, like, hey, we can have this level of results by putting your piece of the equation onto Databricks. What about this piece that connects to you? And he's like, well, we can have a call and I could bring that guy on. Now you have two pieces, two Legos, and you slowly start building your spaceship, right? So it's all about finding one very small. It's great if one person can oversee it, because then you don't have to do a very complex motion to win that first workload. If it's like one thing that one person has total power over, all you have to do is sell to that guy. Win that one workload, and you now have a beachhead, because the first dollar is the toughest. Like going through, getting NDAs signed, getting their IT security team to approve you being in their environment. All those things are done before the first dollar is spent. Okay, now you are an approved vendor. Like, you're inside the firewall. Well, now it's just a matter of convincing the guy next to him that handles the piece that touches his piece. Hey, like, what about twice the speed, half the price, whatever their particular lever is. Every company's value proposition will be different. Ours tends to circle around a triangle of someone is either spending too much money, their environment's too complex, or they want better performance. And it might be two, it might be three, all three of them. But typically we find one of those levers to really press on. And then you just, it all gets very bespoke from there. But yeah, it's a motion about if you can find this one guy and you can change his daily work life for the better and make him a hero so that he's now like, hey, boss, I spearheaded this Databricks thing, and it's awesome. We are spending half as much money. We are twice as fast. We now have the capability to do 3 times as much. We're so much more productive. We can tackle that new Gen AI project that we thought we weren't going to get to till 2025 because now we've saved all these engineering hours. Oh, interesting. Okay, well, wait, can Databricks also do X? Why, yes, we can. Let's take a look at it. Start sticking Legos together.
Go.
Yeah, build from there.
Great example of landing the beachhead and expanding.
And now, treat every department like it's its own company, because it really is. Like, they all have their own like power structures, formal and informal. Every organization, I've been in accounts where it's like data engineering loves us, data science hates us. So it's like data engineering wants everything moved to Databricks, data science will die before they'll use Databricks. And so you have to treat it like almost like 2 companies that occupy the same building because they don't have the same attitude, they don't have the same priorities. Yeah.
And as a seller, you can help align different siloed departments too. You can bring a lot of value in that way to an organization.
And when you find a champion, dude, you empower that person. You want to make them look good to their boss. You want them to make more money. You want them to do. And if you become the engine for them getting promoted, like I've had deals where I start working with a guy, and by the time we're done, he's the CTO or the president of the company. And I've been in his hip pocket the whole time. And
wow.
he views me as like his secret weapon. And that's a great role to play.
And that's a customer for life. And I'd even say
Beyond
that's a friend for life.
Yeah, dude, I still talk to him every day. He's one of my really good friends. He's the CEO of his particular company now, and he's an amazing guy.
You know, when I talk to customers, I do say a lot of times I want to make you look like a hero. And that right there is an amazing example.
For sure, man. Well, and keep in mind that the I always think it's something that we lose, but like, again, they're getting all this email traffic, all these fewer phone calls than ever before. I always urge people to use the phone because now they are getting fewer actual phone calls than any time in the history of our business. You can stand out just by being willing to use the phone.
What an opportunity. Like 20, and it's higher converting.
Oh yeah. 20, 30 dials a day as a field rep can make you unlimited upside. It's crazy. You used to have to make 100 dials to have the impact you can have now with 15 or 25. It's crazy. So, because the traffic just isn't there. But what I always tell people is it's very easy to tell the guy from Databricks or the guy from Bespin to fuck off. That's incredibly easy. More difficult to tell Chris to fuck off, to tell Andy to fuck off. Becoming a human being to these people, like, and I'm not saying you need to go in with some like sociopathic plan about like, oh, I'm going to show him pictures of my kids so he'll feel bad for me and he won't tell me, that's not what I'm saying. But I am saying develop yourself as a well-rounded human so that you can relate to a larger number of human beings. And if you can create a real human connection with these people, they will have a tougher time. And you don't want to make it hard. I should really frame it the other direction. It'll be easier for them to keep you around and harder for them to kick you out if they enjoy just having conversation with you. I've had customers where like for like a year we couldn't do a project together because of just something, but we still talked every week because they just liked talking about the Cowboys or history or F1 racing or whatever my myriad of weird hobbies they happen to align with. Those are really valuable connections to make because you never know when the time will come and they'll be like, hey dude, I know we usually just sit here and talk about how frustrating being a Dallas Cowboys fan is, but do you guys actually do XYZ? And you're like, sure, man. Yeah. I mean, we can take a look at it. Sure. Yeah. And then you're in. That's it.
That is such a good lesson. There is such value in building relationships today with no promise of deals tomorrow. One, because it is good to inherently build relationships and connect with people, but two, it's unpredictable when the opportunity does come around, and it's not like Andy at Databricks. It's Andy, the person. They have that relationship, and they really like you, and people buy from people they like. And dude, clearly you've invested in yourself and being this well-rounded person, and you have many talents and hobbies outside of work. Don't you have a podcast on the Cowboys?
I do.
Tell us real quick about that, and I could link it in the description of the video.
It's called Boys Will Be Boys. It's me and two of my childhood best friends. We've known each other since second grade. We've gone to training camp together. We've done the whole thing. They both still live in Dallas. I live down here, and it started as just like we would always talk for like hours a week about the Cowboys on the phone anyway, and we decided to just record it. But we have a great time. We have listeners all over the world, which is really a surreal thing. You like look at the metrics, and you're like, "There's 2 guys in Russia that just listen to our podcast every week."
That is like, nuts.
It's wild,
and not just once, every week.
They're worried about like getting drafted to go fight in Ukraine, but they're taking time to listen to my little podcast about the Cowboys. Yeah, man. I think there are universal human experiences that most people align with. And that's why I always caution people about making their job or their career or their company their personality. One, because you don't have control over those things. It may seem like you do, but working at Google can get ripped away from you no matter how good you do. Working at Databricks or Bespin can get ripped away from you no matter how good you do. Being the things that you hold important in your own personal life, you have control over those, and they are eternal to you as long as you exist. And so spending all your time, I'm not saying like it's not a good use of your time to like read sales books or like learn more about the technology. I do all those things, but being a person whose entire personality is built around working at Google or like selling, being a sales guy, oftentimes I caution people about that because you slowly kind of can scoot your perspective on life a little bit, and you don't want to get to a point where you no longer align with the same frame as the people you're selling to. When you get on the phone with a CTO or even a director or something at one of your customers, if you've spent the last week spending 100 hours thinking about sales, all the information rattling around in your head is about selling, and they don't think about selling anything. Like, that's not their world. And so it's like, what if they just want to have a casual conversation about something else? And you've filled your RAM up with all this sales knowledge and all this other stuff. Make sure that you give yourself time, not just for this reason. This is very selfish and self-serving, but like also because it's like deeply rewarding to cultivate a well-rounded life. I'm a person. I mean, I'm a recovering heroin addict. I'm an addictive person by nature, and my wife calls it my phases. She always makes fun of me because I'll like get into something, I get really into it. Like I'll get into chess, and I'll be like, okay, I'm going to read every great chess book. I'm going to play thousands of hours of online chess. I'm going to buy a really nice chess set. I went through a car phase. I've been through I got really good at 3-gun shooting, like competition level pistol, rifle, shotgun shooting, all these different phases. And what I got this tattoo that says nothing in excess in Latin, because one of the keys, I believe, to a happy, fulfilling life is to never let one thing dominate your entire existence. Because once you put all your eggs in one basket, the basket can topple over, it can get run over, you can lose it. Like becoming a person who has many things that are important. It's like diversifying your portfolio, but in life. And therefore, you can relate to a whole bunch of different kinds of people more easily. A downturn in one area of your life does not affect you nearly as much if you're not entirely invested in that. If your whole world is the Dallas Cowboys, Sundays will suck for you. I can assure you from experience. But if that's like one thing you're into, but you also love this other thing, like you can balance yourself between all these interests, and it helps. And again, just from a purely selfish sales perspective, being into a ton of stuff will enable you to relate to all different people from all different walks of life.
Yeah. And it's so important to be a chameleon in sales and be able to adapt to people and relate. And I don't mean that it's in a manipulative way. It's inherently good.
Don't lie about who you voted for president because you want to.
You want to be authentic, right? But it is a plus. And it's funny you mentioned Sundays being rough, and that was the case for me. When I was a kid and I was so emotionally invested in the Green Bay Packers and I didn't have a lot going on when I'm in middle school and high school.
You deserve that. The Packers are a terrible organization that deserves all the bad things that happen.
Oh, ouch. I think
that you guys ran us over in the playoffs, so like I'm still a little bitter.
You know, it's the Packers and the Cowboys that are vying for America's team. And now I know the Cowboys are the original America's team. The Packers, they're pretty well liked, and the Packer fans travel around.
Yeah,
owned by the people.
Are the Packers the most valuable sports franchise in the history of organized athletics? Oh no, that would be the Dallas Cowboys.
I might have to get back to you on that one.
Are the Packers in the top 5? No, they're not. Jamie, pull that up.
But hey, back as a kid, I was so emotionally invested.
For sure,
in it.
man.
And Sundays actually, my Monday would be horrible if we lost.
Dude.
But a testament to your point, now that I have a balanced life in my career and I have other passions, the podcast and different things, I might even miss a game. And I still love the Packers. But the point is, I'm not so caught up in it, or if they lose, it's not like my whole life is derailed.
Well, it's like anything, man. It's like, even if, and again, there's nothing wrong with like loving your job and like being really into it. But if you're the kind of person that like spends all your time thinking about like, how can I sell this? How can I close this deal? Like, dude, you're just going to be, you're opening your sales up to like wins that you don't have control over. You know what I mean? Like if you lose the job for something, good or bad reasons, it can devastate your whole world. Or like you lose out on a deal. It's like a girl broke up with you. Like it can be really devastating. So like having that be an important but not dominating piece of your existence is just a way, way stronger foundation to build your kind of the house of your life on than to be all in on one thing.
It's like diversifying your stock portfolio. It's a winning strategy in diversifying our identity and where we invest our time and effort. And that is such a good lesson. And back when I was at Google, I really was like, I'm Chris at Google. And I still lean on that with branding on the podcast, right? Because people, will get some clicks, honestly. And people want to get into Google.
It was one of the hardest parts about leaving Google for me.
Yeah.
There's again, and I had to admit to myself that was like part of this is my ego is tied up in when I tell people I work at Google, they know what that is. They're impressed by it. I like being impressive. I like positive attention.
Oh, yeah. Me too.
But again, it's like that is not within your control. And if you want to leave what's impressive about you up to the whims of a massive soulless corporation whose job it is to make money, like their job isn't to make you look good. Their job isn't even to delight their customers. That's a nice to have side quest for them. Their job is to make money for their shareholders. Not the best thing to hitch your wagon to from a happiness perspective. You know what I mean?
Now, when I look at Databricks, I'm like, damn, that's like one of the best companies there is in technology. And it's not a surprise that Nancy Pelosi invested $5 million. I only know because
that's the winning magic right there.
Yeah, I only knew that because you mentioned it. But I mean, they're an incredible company, man. I see them all the time in my day-to-day at Bespin when I'm working with the top data practices, whether it's enterprise or startup. So let's talk about what really drew you to Databricks and what gets you excited about the space you're in now. And then we'll wrap up the podcast talking about family and some of the stuff that really matters.
So I think what really drew me to Databricks was one, I mean, again, life is timing, and this is a very exciting time to be at Databricks. We get a lot of press right now. We were just in the Forbes top 50 best AI companies. We are at the very, very top right of the Gartner and Forrester wave as far as AI and data lakehouse platforms and data management platforms. And I saw in Databricks two things that really immediately pulled me. One is if all the best people that you've worked with over the course of your career now work at one place, that's a really good sign that you might want to be there too. You never want to be the smartest or best person in any room you're in. You want to be around people that make you better and you can learn things from. And Databricks was, as soon as I started looking into it, probably like half of all the best sales folks I've ever worked with in my entire career are now somewhere at Databricks, which is crazy. And second is you want to align in the moment where this company is. And Databricks is big enough to be a big deal. They're on the edge of going public in the next couple of years, and that's obviously, like, from a financial perspective, everyone wants to work at a company at the moment they go public, that they have a stake in it. But also Databricks is still in that period of their company's life where they're small enough to really be kind of ideologically aligned together. Everyone seems to be rowing in the same direction. We feel like we're on the very cutting edge of the Gen AI large language model wave, and we're doing some really exciting work with kind of the biggest and best players across all the major clouds when it comes to Gen AI to kind of build on top of that. This has been, I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast that when I read Steve Jobs' biography by Walter Isaacson, it really ignited a fire in me around kind of the technology and the hope that technology brought to the world. And over the next decade, I kind of went through a reformation of that viewpoint based on just like things that happened in the world. We saw kind of, we went from the social network came out and Mark Zuckerberg was viewed as this like incandescent genius of his generation. And then we saw like through political events and things like that, like the dark side of social media, the dark side of Facebook and misinformation and things like that. And my view of technology had shifted to being technology itself is an incredible tool, but it has been wielded by many different people and groups of people for less than great uses, and that makes me sad. But what I found when I started reading, I read another book called What the Dormouse Said, which I always recommend people read, and it's about why Silicon Valley exists where it does, because the foundations of the computer industry really were on the East Coast, where like IBM was in New York and MIT's Advanced Computing Laboratory. And the reason that the personal computing revolution happened on the West Coast was because it was also the site of the countercultural revolution of the 60s, people taking acid and the hippie movement, the convolution of political and social forces that were very different on the West Coast than the East. And I think now the kind of East versus West Coast mentality of that time, whether it was going to be like big centralized control versus individual liberty of everyone having their own computer. Now we're seeing that play out again with technology should be proprietary and owned by these large companies, or technology is best developed by the open source. And the open source community and the power that it has to develop really amazing technology kind of reminded me of those old feelings I had of hope and joy around the power of community and the power of people to play a role in the development of technology for the good of humanity. And Databricks is an open source company. And to kind of dip my toes back into the waters of the open source community and see how powerful it can be when it isn't just, this technology isn't being developed for the good of a single entity or a group of shareholders or anything like that. This is technology that is being developed by a massive population of people, all from all walks of life, with all different motivations for doing so. And all of that is built together towards the purpose of creating a great piece of technology that then we can take and use for our own purposes. So all those things really drew me to it. And then from a total selfish sales guy perspective, they're killing it. And I'm having the best year of my career at Databricks, which is really nice. So
yeah, you're on pace to make buku bucks and set yourself on the path to true freedom and probably an early retirement. And hey, it's not selfish. You've got a family to support, right? So we could, if you have more thoughts to riff on that point, we can. But I think it's a perfect segue to talk about what really matters.
Sure.
You know,
I mean, that is the goal for me. Is like, when I was younger, if you'd ask me what would you do if you win the lottery, it'd be probably a list of exotic cars and like cool private jet flights. Now it's more about like I never want to miss an important moment with my kids. And I had just had my second. My daughter was born in February. She's about to be 4 months old tomorrow. And little Zoe Grace, she's super, super adorable.
We're dedicating the podcast to Zoe Grace.
There you go. Right. I love you, baby. And yeah, man, like the idea of what financial resources can do as far as just providing stability and the resources necessary to like keep your family safe. And if something happens, you can just respond to it very differently than if you're like living very close to the edge. I now, and at this point in my life, have a much greater respect for what a true fortunate and privileged position that is to be in than when I was 23 years old. And yeah, man, I mean, I'm very excited for the prospect of like having some really great years at Databricks. Hopefully they go public, and then I'll be in a position to spend the back stretch of my career maybe doing occupying roles within our industry that are way more about following passions than just always kind of leading with where the best financial situation would be. If I can find myself in more of like a product evangelist role or something like that, right now that doesn't make sense because I really am good at this job and I really love being good at this job, and it provides a tremendously good lifestyle for my family. But post like one really good tech IPO, your priorities change. So yeah, man.
You're a shining example of how this path in tech sales can generate the skill set, the financial freedom, the relationships to then have the flexibility to do whatever you really want, to support your passions, obviously your family. And it can just...
I was lucky, man. My dad was a tech sales guy. And so like, I grew up around it. I think, which is like a new thing, right? Like if your parents are like old, if your dad's 70, tech sales didn't exist when he was 25. Like I was really fortunate. Like my dad, I remember being a kid and going to my dad's office and they were selling like, computers for graphic rendering and stuff like that. So like it was always kind of around, and that was, like all young men, I was like, I'll never do that. I'll never do that job. And now here I am. So
yeah, I thought I was going to be a professional baseball player, but little did I know I'd be a professional seller. But what's crazy is there's so many parallels between being a pro athlete and a pro seller. You really are, at the end of the day, a professional doer.
Sure.
Instead of hacking away, taking swings, you're
Plus,
picking
man,
up the phone. And
every job is a sales job. People just don't want to admit it to themselves because sales scares people.
Yeah. What is it about sales that scares people? There is a real negative perception.
Oh, yeah, man.
There?
Well, I mean, I don't even think it's like I think people, the idea of like, I have to bother people, I have to convince people, I have to carry a number. Like, carrying a number sucks. Like for most people's job, they just like have this thing, a set of tasks they need to do at like from 8 a.m. to like 4 or 5 p.m. and then it's done. Sales isn't like that. If you do a really good job in most jobs, like, and you end the year doing well, you start January 1 and everyone's like, you're awesome. In our job, you can have the greatest year of your life. January 1, you start at 0. Again.
And we expect more from you.
Right, exactly. Then it only gets worse. But I'm a believer in the idea that every job is a sales job in some way, shape, or form. Whether it's like you're selling your vision to an organization, you're selling your people on doing a thing differently. My wife runs a nursing home, and she always like is repelled by the idea that she's in sales. But I'm always like, what do you spend all your whole day doing? Convincing a large group of people to act in a certain way, to implement some new initiative. You're selling families on the idea that this is a great place for them to put their elderly relatives. You're selling those residents on the idea that this is a great place for them to make their home. Like every job is a sales job. It requires convincing. It requires education. It requires continual maintenance of relationships. Like that's what sales is. But again, when people think sales, they think of like being sold a car. And so they're like, oh, I don't do that. I'm like, but you do.
Yeah. I mean, weren't we all born to sell? Zoe's born. She's like, Dad. I don't know if she probably doesn't talk now, but I want food, right? Like that's the first sales pitch.
You are trying to get someone to take action that you want them to do, even if they don't want to do it.
Yeah.
It's the essence of human interaction.
Speaking of Zoe, you described the magic of having a child, and that's something that I have no experience with, but I hope to one day. So can you describe in the way that you described to me, maybe you recall just the magic of having a kid and how that changes things?
It's one of those things that everyone tells you is going to be crazy, but you can kind of accept that and be like, oh yeah, I bet. I mean, it seems like it'll be nuts. I'm sure from your perspective, you're probably like, yeah, I bet. But you don't know until you experience it. When they pull a living being that has grown to this big out of a person that you are in love with, and they put that child on your wife's shoulder, and you put your pinky next to them and this little tiny hand grabs and squeezes you, it's overwhelming, man. You get lightheaded. I almost fainted when my son was born. It is very clarifying. There are no priorities other than the maintenance of this child. There is nothing that matters greater in the universe. This might be like a dark direction to take it, but it is truly the moment where I, as a man, knew I was capable of murder. I was like, if anyone ever harmed this kid, that's it. And it was like, it wasn't abstract. It was not like, well, if they were coming at me, and I was like, nope. Like, suddenly any story I've ever heard about like, oh, this kid got harmed by this adult and their dad killed him, I was like, yep, for sure, dude. Like, most definitely. So yeah, man, it changes the orientation of your entire existence. Like, you feel deeply coded in your DNA that this is what you're supposed to be doing. And it's, on a totally molecular biological level, like, all life is trying to procreate and pass on its genetic information to the next generation and leave a legacy. This is a living, breathing, walking, talking legacy, and you have created it and birthed it into the world. And now your job is to protect it until it can protect itself. All of the things are secondary. It's pretty crazy.
Well, happy birthday to Zoe.
Right? Happy
girl.
4 months.
4 months. Oh my gosh. Congratulations, man. It's great to see the Gotelli family continue to expand, the monster success ahead of you this year at Databricks and beyond. And I'm so glad
hopefully
to call
with the
you
assistance
a friend.
of my friend Chris at Bespin.
Yeah, we could help implement some technology.
We plan on it.
But and a beautiful thing about this path is to be able to work with friends like you and tag team deals, create experiences together, get paid together, win together. So, and to also have a friend, man, that isn't just on this path, but has a podcast as well is so cool. So I just wanted to wrap up the conversation, encouraging the audience to connect with Andy on LinkedIn. Check out his podcast as well if you're into football and into the Cowboys. And
if you like to hear grown men cry, tune in.
Yeah, right. I mean, who doesn't like that? That's riveting. So, Andy, any final calls to action or maybe words of encouragement to the audience?
Yeah, I mean, I think your audience in particular are people who are like trying to determine if this career path is for them. I would say it is worth taking a moment to do some discovery about, right? I think this job, more than any other job that I've ever known of, gives you really the opportunity to do something different every day, to learn, to meet a new person, to learn about their business, to invest your time, energies, talents, efforts, knowledge into making their business better, to make their life better. And I think it is something that if it aligns with kind of how you're built as a person, it can be deeply rewarding, both financially and emotionally, personally. Oftentimes I think about what I want to be doing in 5 years, and part of me wants to do other things. And I think everyone's kind of predetermined path in our business is like, oh, you'll go manage something. But it'd be really tough for me to give up doing this job every day, because I really do love the brand new human interaction that I get from doing this job. And if I had to give that up for kind of the internal maintenance of management, that'd be really tough for me. So if you are the kind of person that is really energized by discovering new things, interacting with new people, learning about new ideas, new concepts, and then pouring yourself into those things to make them better, this could be a career path that you find deeply, deeply rewarding, even outside of the pretty significant financial gifts that it can bring.
What you just shared really resonates with me and what has made this path so rewarding. Thank you for your time, for sharing your wisdom, your encouragement, man. I feel ready to go out and conquer the world.
Thanks, Chris.
Right, and show them my medal. Like, this was an amazing conversation.
Dude, I hope we get to do it again. I've really loved it.
I can't wait, man. We're going to have you on many more times in the future, celebrating more fun milestones. And
hell yeah.
I look forward to it. To the audience, thank you for showing up, for your time and attention, for your desire to learn and improve and live a full life. If you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did, give the like button a love tap, share the conversation with more people who could benefit from the message, because the algorithm, loves those things. And I really do want to, serve as many people as possible with this conversation. And to your success in tech sales and in life, happy selling and happy living. And we'll see you in the next one.